Take a look at David's lead. Oh my goodness, there is a Regieleki on the field. I'm delighted, but even more so by its partner, the Regidrago there as well, looking calm, cool and collected next to Regieleki, bouncing around excitably. And I really love this lead from David. I'm going to be very interested to see what he's going to do with it. Opposing the lead of Venusaur and Grimmsnarl for Nick.
Yeah, he's got a couple of options, David. Here, he can go for obviously the Electro Web, which can slow things down on Nick's side of the field, and then go for that the Dragon Energy, which can do big damage to the Venusaur, but not the Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl sitting in a nice position here where it's immune to it through its Fairy typing. But we are just seeing Nick go straight for that Gigantamax into the Venusaur, and that is going to be the first turn here, and it probably will be enough to take some damage from these opposing Pokemon, but still very interesting to see what David goes for. It's not a combination that we see too often, this Regidrago and Regieleki.
No, exactly. And Venusaur's out here on the field without a Torkoal, so potentially could see that coming into later turns. But Regidrago, no surprises for us at the moment. We have to still wait in suspense as it just goes for a Protect. Light Screen's going to come out as well from the Grimmsnarl, which is quite wise when you're facing down against two special attackers. Volt Switch connecting into the Venusaur, not of course going to deal a lot of damage, but I think critically it allows Regieleki to go back to David, its trainer, and come back in a little bit later in the game. Also allows David to reposition up his board state a little bit, bringing in that Incineroar. Not so much for the Intimidate value here, but I think for the Fake Out, to be able to stop that Grimmsnarl from going for any Prankster moves on this next turn might enable the Regidrago to do some exciting action. But first of all, G-Max, Vine Lash going to come out from the Venusaur, connecting into the Incineroar actually. So, you know, really good switch in here by David, but the critical thing here for Nick is he's been able to get up that residual damage from those Vines, and that's going to chip away at the Regidrago here and the Incineroar.
Yeah, and the big thing about the chipping away at the Regidrago, of course, is reducing that HP stat, because its big move that it relies on, Dragon Energy, is reliant on that HP stat as well. The more HP it has, the more damage it's doing, and by just getting the residual damage to a start now and just getting a little bit of chip onto the Regidrago's, weakening that attack and making it less impactful. So Nick doing all the right things and getting the damage into the Incineroar there for David really kind of hinders the ability of the Incineroar to be very impactful here. You know, it's going to be in range now of a Max Quake. We know Venusaur commonly carries that, so that's something that David is going to be aware of. Does he switch? Maybe he's got something in the back with a ground immunity he could bring in here, but it's very risky because also Nick's very, you know, comfortable with his team. He knows how players play against him, so he may play into that. It's going to be, you know, as you see the Regidrago switch out, he wants to preserve that for a little bit later on.
Yeah, a lot of Intimidate uses coming in here for David. You know, Incineroar came out on the field last turn. This time we have got the Landorus jumping in, going to Intimidate across the opposing side of the field. Grimmsnarl going for the Reflect this time. Quite wise again, now two physical attackers on the field. So Grimmsnarl really trying to identify what the best defensive strategy will be. Venusaur going to go for the Max Ooze though, connecting into that Landorus, does about a third of damage. But the critical thing with that Max Ooze is getting that special attack boost up. That's going to make Venusaur a bigger threat to be reckoned with going into this next turn, being at +1 special attack. Incineroar going to go for the Flare Blitz, however, does a huge chunk of damage, takes it down to about a third left of HP.
Yeah, sorry, Lou, nearly cut you off there before you finished. But all I was going to say is because of the Reflect support that this Grimmsnarl is providing, it just allows this Venusaur so much room. It doesn't even need the Torkoal support here, and getting that Max Ooze off in a really an advantage situation which he was in is a really nice play. Now he's in a position to bring that Torkoal in now, potentially get rid of the Landorus, take away one threat, and get rid of the Incineroar on the other hand as well. There are two big threats on the field from David at the minute for that Venusaur if one of them decides to max. But the thing is, the Venusaur going to outspeed the Incineroar, so it doesn't make too much sense there. But the Landorus is in a key spot now. If the Sun doesn't come onto the field, it can Dynamax and it can get an Airstream into that Venusaur and potentially remove it from the field. So if you're Nick, is this a time to maybe bring in the Torkoal and get rid of the Landorus while you've got the opportunity to?
Well, Nick really taking every second there to count down the clock, thinking through his strategy here. And it's time for David to go for that Dynamax as well, trying to match Nick here. Of course, Nick only has one more turn left of the Dynamax on that Venusaur, and it's going to be the Landorus coming into the fray. This is something I absolutely love to see. I think Dynamax Landorus is such a powerhouse in the competitive video game realm at the moment. You know, it can do so much versatility, can go for max Airstreams, max Quakes. It's going to be very interesting to see what David is going for and which setup option he wants to do for his side of the field. Protect coming out from the Grimmsnarl, however, it's actually just going to be a Max Guard from the Landorus, not what I was expecting, but a nice defensive play. Defensive plays all round here, Lee. Max Guard coming out from that Venusaur as well, and poor Incineroar, the only one who didn't get the memo, goes for an offensive pressure here into the Max Guard of that Venusaur.
Yeah, and that's a really nice play here, in particular from Nick. You know, he's utilizing the G-Max Vine Lash residual damage that it's picking up every turn to make sure that it doesn't take any additional damage from that Incineroar, and just making sure that it is in range to go down from that Vine Lash excess damage, and it does go down here, avoiding the Flare Blitz hit here. And now the Venusaur, it's in an interesting spot where you can switch in the Torkoal, and if it's got access to something like Sleep Powder, you can put something like the Landorus to sleep, or just hit it with a big attack, because you are +1 at the minute, and it's potentially going to be maybe enough to pick up the knockout. It'll be very close from this point. Regidrago as well, not in the greatest spot with the Grimmsnarl out in the field. Regidrago doesn't really have the coverage to hit fairy type, so Nick in a really good spot. David got all the work to do here.
Landorus going to go for that max airstream, however, targeting down into the Grimmsnarl. Wants to try and remove it from the field, so Regidrago has more utility and more options to hit. Obviously not going to deal damage into those fairy types like you mentioned there, Lee. So removing Grimmsnarl would be key there for David. Regidrago is going to go for that Dragon Energy, you know, thanks to the speed boost got from that max airstream. I love this animation as well. Going to be guys and super fast, going down into only the Venusaur, enough to pick up the KO, however. And it's just leaving itself that little bit vulnerable, though, to this Grimmsnarl. Going to be going for that Spirit Break, connecting straight down into the Regidrago. Does do a small chunk of damage, takes it down to just below a third, and lowers that special attack, which is the critical thing here. You know, as a special attacker, you do not want your attacking damage stats reduced at all.
Yeah, and you can see the benefit here of those double intimidates that David's put onto the field earlier on. You know, between the Landorus and the Incineroar, both of those making sure that the Regidrago taking minimal damage from that Spirit Break when it does come out, and the Regidrago doing a nice job of removing the Venusaur from the field. Finally, after it's had quite a successful Gigantamax set of turns.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting, though. Nick has brought a Trick Room setter out onto the field, and there's not really a lot that David can do to stop Trick Room from going up here. David's also set up the max airstream previously. He's speedier than Nick is at the moment in terms of speed dimensions on the field, so he does not want Trick Room to go up at all. And when you look at Nick's team, the Pokemon that he could potentially have in the back could be relatively slow. Torkoal and Glastrier, for example. This could be a great turning point here for Nick.
Yeah, and especially because, like we've mentioned at the start, one of the things that David needs to really try and do is mitigate the Trick Room and prevent that from going up. And now behind the Grimmsnarl support with the screens there, they haven't really got the Pokemon on the field to really do the damage that you need to onto the Dusclops, so making it even more difficult, and being one of the most consistent Trick Room setters in the format. Nick really playing this quite, you know, conservatively, bringing the Dusclops in at the right time to get and, you know, set that Trick Room up and make it nearly impossible for David to kind of make any sort of comeback, especially after those airstreams, like you mentioned, Lou, just boosting the speed on his side of the field and kind of playing really into Nick's hands here, and like a counter effect almost for David and what he wanted to achieve.
And that's the thing as well, Regieleki being the other Pokemon here. It's a very, very speedy Pokemon. It doesn't want Trick Room either. So Nick has got the environment of the battlefield exactly where he wants it at the moment. Probably wouldn't even mind that Grimmsnarl going down potentially. Gives him the free switch into a Pokemon in the back. Dusclops is going to go for the Pain Split into that Regieleki. Going to regain itself a little bit of HP and deplete Regieleki's in return. As Grimmsnarl goes for another Spirit Break, connecting onto Regieleki that's joined the field. Takes it below 50% HP remaining and lowers that special attack as well. Regieleki going to go for the Volt Switch, however, connecting into Grimmsnarl, not enough to pick up the KO, and gives David the opportunity to bring that Regidrago back onto the field, but this time minus that max airstream boost.
Yeah, and that's the thing now. Regidrago going to come back onto the field, but in just as an awkward position as it was previous turn. Now you have got the option to potentially protect it here, try and stall out these Trick Room turns, maybe try and get an Earthquake or something like that off with Landorus. If you can, just remove the Grimmsnarl from the field, and at least that's one step closer to stalling out the Trick Room turns and seeing out the rest of this match, but not going to be enough, unfortunately. That Trick Room, once we saw it set up by Nick there, just far too much for David to deal with, and I think it was timed perfectly, because I think most of the time when you see a Trick Room team or a very kind of Trick Room oriented team, like you look at Nick's team there, you think, okay, well, let's lead with things that can prevent that, or like at least cover that. And if you don't see the Trick Room up front and you kind of tackle up the battle like that and almost forget about the potential Trick Room threat that could be coming later in the game, if you lose those checks to that, then the game falls apart very quickly. And, you know, it was a little bit, we couldn't really get the most out of the Regidrago there. I think the Venusaur lead with the Grimmsnarl was a really nice option there for Nick, and he used it very well and with very minimal effort almost. So I think David needs to make some big adjustments, maybe bring the Incineroar as a lead, because I think one of the issues was obviously pressuring that Venusaur from the start. You need to get some pressure onto it from the beginning, and Incineroar feels like a good Pokemon to be able to do that. It's got access to Fake Out as well to kind of slow down the Grimmsnarl as well from Nick's side of the field. It was really, really key in that match.
I mean, as much as it pains me to say it, unfortunately Regidrago and Regieleki just couldn't shine in that particular match. You've already touched on Regidrago facing down against that Grimmsnarl really did limit the options and utility of that Regidrago. But again, with the Regieleki, you know, it's a Pokemon that really doesn't thrive in a Trick Room environment, but also the damage output that it was dealing to the Venusaur and to the Grimmsnarl, particularly once Light Screen went up, was just really not enough to be anything that Nick would have to be concerned with at that point. And of course, we didn't really get to see the Pokemon that Nick had in the back, but any of those Trick Room setters would have been able to deal out so much damage. So I think you're rightly, if you are David, you're going to have to really think about, how do I stop Trick Room from going up? The Incineroar could be a really great option going for that Fake Out, but ultimately if it does go up as well, David has to find a way to maybe try and stall it out and survive.
Yeah, that's one of the things. And I think if you're David and wanting to utilize the Regidrago, I think one of the first things you're going to have to think about doing and dealing with is that Grimmsnarl. You just can't damage it if it's on the field, that Fairy type, and it's the only Fairy type that Nick has on his team. So once you deal with that, you know anything else coming in after that is going to take big damage from the Regidrago. So maybe try and plan a little bit more around it being an end game. That might be a way for him to approach this one. Lead with that Incineroar, gives you a lot of flexibility, gives you the Intimidate straight off the bat. It gives you a way to pressure the Venusaur, way to disrupt the Grimmsnarl, and maybe bring something else like the Landorus in that situation where you can start pressuring from the start rather than trying to adapt your board position and go from there. But like I said, it's tough, because if Nick leads with something like the Dusclops in that situation, if you haven't got something like Taunt on your Incineroar, the Trick Room's going up, and then it becomes very difficult. You know, it's such a tough matchup on both sides of the field, depending on what the players lead with, of course.
Well, let's find out what they lead with. Let's jump into Game 2 and see how difficult the battle will be, whether David Koutesh can try and push this to a Game 3 or not. Remember, they are fighting for their tournament lives at this point. We are in the losers bracket, and it is going to be Landorus and Regieleki coming out for David. Venusaur and Grimmsnarl once again for Nick. And again, this is where things can get a little bit interesting. The Intimidate coming down onto that Grimmsnarl. Venusaur not going to worry about it too much, but Venusaur in prime position to go for one of those G-Max Vine Lashes once again, start dealing some good damage and getting that residual damage onto the field as well.
Yeah, the Venusaur Grimmsnarl lead, I don't see there was any need for Nick to really change things up here. It was so effective in game 1, so why would you change it up? The pressure's not on you here. The pressure's on David to kind of respond to the question that was given to him in that game 1 defeat. David responding pretty well though, in all honesty, with the Landorus lead. I feel like it puts on instantly a lot of pressure onto this Venusaur, and it makes Nick maybe consider bringing the Torkoal here if he wants to get some use out of the Venusaur early on. But you've got the Grimmsnarl screens that you can also take advantage of. You can set up a Reflect to kind of nullify or kind of just weaken the damage from the opposing Landorus if it does decide to Dynamax in this first turn.
Well, David Koutesh deciding to Dynamax straight away in this Game 2, going straight onto the offensive with that Landorus once again, going to Dynamax it up. And this is where you can start applying pressure to that Venusaur. With something like a Max Airstream, you're going to be able to deal a huge chunk of damage, and particularly when there's no sunshine on the field, you know, the speed advantage there for that Venusaur is not going to be favourable. Nick is, however, going to click that Dynamax button of his very own, and we've got once again a very offensive start to a Pokemon match here, with Dynamax happening in turn 1 apiece. So, G-Max Venusaur on the field once again, Lee.
Yeah, back on the field again. Probably fishing for one of those G-Max Vine Lash like we saw in that first game. Start getting that residual damage onto the field as soon as possible. But no, completely wrong. Just a Max Guard, Lou.
Yeah, just going defensive this time. There's me going on how it's a very offensive start. We've got a Reflect being set up to prevent that physical damage from dealing as much as possible. And also the Max Guard from that Venusaur. The Electro Ball does a huge amount of damage though into that opposing Grimmsnarl, coming off the speed difference between the two Pokemon, and that was just catastrophic damage there. Venusaur being able to protect itself as well, and I love that Max Guard from the Venusaur. It stops the Regieleki from potentially going for that Volt Switch like we saw in game 1 and getting itself hit off the field, but Regieleki is here to stay, going for that Electro Ball. Huge damage.
Yeah, massive damage. I wasn't expecting it to actually pick up the knockout there, but that is some huge damage right there from the Regieleki. You know, it's not the most common move that you see used on Regieleki, but really taking advantage of that high speed stat and the low speed stat of the Grimmsnarl there, and making sure that you're getting the most out of that damage and just removing it from the field. And that's a big play there for David to take advantage early on in this match. You know, he hasn't got his airstream off, but he has been able to remove that big support option there from Nick's side of the field.
Yeah, and something like a choice specs on those Regieleki will be boosting up the special attack even further. Could be very much the reason why that Grimmsnarl was able to be KO'd. But now going into this turn, you know, David's been able to take a really big win here, but there's still a lot of Pokemon you've got to play around. The Glastrier is out here on the field. Being an Ice-type Pokemon, that can threaten the Landorus a lot if it's able to survive out the turns. It is incredibly slow, going to be moving last out here on the field, but like I said, if it can survive and Landorus leaves itself exposed, that could be a very solid KO.
Yeah, the problem is as well for the Glastrier, because it's so slow, it's a lot slower than the Grimmsnarl. It's going to take even more damage from the Electro Ball, you know, and it's very susceptible to being potentially knocked out. I don't know how it's been trained, but you know, it's always going to be something that you've got to worry about as well after losing the Grimmsnarl, which has got quite a lot of defensive capabilities to it.
Well, I think it's quite a wise protect then. We saw the Electro Ball targeting down into that slot, so no damage apiece coming out from those Pokemon. Venusaur is going to have to take the max Airstream, however, is able to survive, but once again, the speeds are going to be increasing on David Koutesh's side of the field. Both the Regieleki and the Landorus will now be at +1 speed. Landorus, of course, can take a little bit of recoil from that Life Orb as Venusaur retaliates with the G-Max Vine Lash into Regieleki, and Regieleki is no more on the field for David Koutesh, but I think he picked up a really critical KO there. You know, particularly as the light screen wasn't set up by the Grimmsnarl in time, that could really help out for potentially Pokemon in the back there, like that Regidrago maybe coming in, and Grimmsnarl not being on the field anymore would mean that Regieleki has really carved the path for that Regidrago to come out and shine in Game 2, like it was unable to in Game 1.
Yeah, it feels like a very good opportunity now for David. He set a very good board position for himself where he can go for another max Airstream this next turn, and if it is the Regidrago that comes in, can boost the speed of that before its Dynamax turns end. And then with the sheer power of that, you could double in on that Glastrier slot knowing that it's just protected and pick up a big knockout and not have to worry about the Venusaur too much. It's so low health at the minute where it will go down to whatever the Regidrago does throw out, and it is that Regidrago that's just hit the field, Lou.
Yeah, Regidrago definitely going to be looking a little bit scary here. Of course, Glastrier, again, in a formidable position here. It can apply super effective damage to both of the Pokemon on David Koutesh's side of the field. So David has to make sure that he plays around this really well, and at the same time, Nick has to make sure he preserves the Glastrier so that it's able to pick up those KOs and potentially maybe preserve it in the back for when an opportunity to maybe set up Trick Room if he has got Dusclops in the back could come around. But, you know, while it's out on the field, maybe take that bold risk and go on the offensive straight away. Something like an Icicle Crash will deal a huge chunk of damage to both of these Pokemon. You can see him really taking every second as well to think it through. You've got the seconds on the clock, you might as well use them. Landorus going to go for that max Airstream, however. Targeting down into Glastrier, does nearly 50%, but this critically will give that speed boost to the Regidrago as well. So if it is going for that Dragon Energy, it's going to be there sitting at full HP. We are going to see the full mighty wrath of this Dragon Energy going to connect down onto the Venusaur and the Glastrier and pick up a double KO. You weren't kidding, Lee, when you said it was powerful.
That is incredible, and you see there really David utilizing it to its maximum potential, getting it in a really great board position and using that max Airstream just to take advantage of the sheer power of it. And we go back to what we said before the match. If you are David, you know, the big thing to do if you want to make and utilize the Regidrago is getting rid of the Grimmsnarl, get rid of the Fairy, and then you don't have any worries. You can get yourself in a position where the Regidrago is just doing so much damage. And if we're going to be able to see the real power of this Regidrago now as it comes onto the field against one of the more the defensively, probably one of the best defensive Pokemon that we got access to in this format for Nick.
Exactly. I mean, Dusclops coming out here on the field for Nick. Not you know, the best Pokemon here to face down against the wrath of David Koutesh's team. And I mean, we said at the end of that Game 1 we want to see the Regidrago shine, and it certainly did here in that Game 2, but it couldn't have got there without the help from Landorus and from that Regieleki as well. Such a powerhouse Regieleki. Great to see it pick up that solid KO against the Grimmsnarl that we said gave, you know, David so much hassle in that Game 1. But I think critically as well, we've got to praise the Landorus. Those max Airstreams really paid off in the end.
Yeah, definitely. And I really like what David did in that match. You know, he said to Nick, really, okay, you've got Grimmsnarl out in the field. You can go for a Reflect and your Venusaur is going to take way less damage. It's going to be a way better position next turn. And then if you do that, you're going to lose your Grimmsnarl. Or you go for the light screen, your Grimmsnarl probably survives from the Electro Ball, but you're going to take way more damage and your Venusaur is going to be in a way worse position the next turn. So I like that the way that David really set up there made it very difficult for Nick to kind of get any momentum from that point. Once the Grimmsnarl went down, that support line had kind of been lost. And, you know, at that point you're thinking maybe try and get the Dusclops onto the field. To set the Trick Room up if your last Pokemon is Glastrier, and then kind of make and take advantage of that. But bringing in the Pokemon that he did bring in at the time, it really didn't kind of, the Glastrier just wasn't enough. It was there to try and put a little bit of offensive pressure on, but the speed advantage that David had at the time was just too much and too overwhelming, especially when the Regieleki finally went down and just made the way for its fellow Reggie to come in and do some big work for him.
That's the thing, Glastrier has the best typing when facing down against a Landorus and a Regidrago. But due to the speed disadvantage that we talked about, Lee, it just wasn't able to execute the moves that it needed to for Nick in order to be able to pick up those KOs. But I don't want to wait any longer. That game was too intense. Let's jump into game 3. Let's see how they're going to be able to adjust going through this. Whether Regieleki and Regidrago will be able to shine once again, or will Glastrier be able to finally get into Trick Room for Nick and start dealing a load of damage. But David sticking with the Landorus and the Regieleki that he led out with in game 2 that took him to victory. Whereas Nick has gone for the Glastrier this time, coming out to the forefront, paired up with that Grimmsnarl. So once again, very interesting here, having the Glastrier reveal its White Herb as well. Not something we commonly see there on the Glastrier, but resetting that Intimidate. If you're Landorus, I would be a little bit worried right now.
Yeah, you don't have that Intimidate that you would normally get into it, so that's a really nice item there that Nick's really utilised and not commonly seen as well, but puts Glastrier in a great position going into this turn 1, and as you see, forcing David to reposition with the Landorus straight away to preserve it for later on in this match.
Exactly, and switching in that Incineroar straight away, you know, that's a Pokemon that's going to want to take those Ice-type moves compared to the Landorus. But Nick, you know, not falling for this, decides to switch out the Glastrier, being slow. It's going to be the second one to switch out on the field, and brings in the Landorus, a Pokemon that isn't going to take any damage from the Electric-type attacks from that Regieleki, but also can fire off that second Intimidate onto the Incineroar that just joined the field. Grimmsnarl going to go for that Light Screen, preserving itself from taking any of that damage from the Regieleki. It's maybe learned its lesson from that game 2, but the Volt Switch looks like it was the move locked into by Regieleki, and it fell onto very stony shoulders there on the Landorus to no effect.
Yeah, that's a nice switch there from Nick, you know, predicting potentially even an Electro Ball there going into the Glastrier to remove it from the field because of the threat that it was imposing on the Landorus on David's side. But yeah, Nick making a really nice switch there, nullifying what the Regieleki did that turn and putting himself in a nice position, getting the Intimidate onto the Incineroar now and weakening it a little bit. And the main thing is he's keeping his Grimmsnarl on the field. He's got that Light Screen support up now, so there isn't really much, you know, threat of it going down to Electro Ball, and you see the pressure that Nick's applying here is forcing that Regieleki straight off the field.
Yeah, exactly. And Intimidate jumping into the fray once again, this time falling onto two good targets here for David. You know, both Nick's Pokemon don't want to be taking those drops. And Grimmsnarl here just really free to keep setting up these screens, now going for that Reflect to block the physical type attacks with the two physical attackers on the field. And the Landorus on Nick's side going for that U-turn as well, so that it can Intimidate a little bit later on and also get itself off the field to safety, carving the path, I want to say, for the Dusclops to be able to rejoin the field and get that Trick Room set up as well. You know, that's something that Nick really wants to do. We've already seen the Glastrier is here. Incineroar, however, revealing the Will-O-Wisp. Not something we often see, but that's really good information here for us viewing the match, because now we know that Glastrier could fall victim to a burn, as well as sort of any fire-type moves coming out from that Incineroar.
Yeah, it's a really nice option that, you know, you've got double Intimidate on your team if you're David, so you wouldn't really think there's a necessity to use Will-O-Wisp to further reduce the physical output from your opponent's team, but a very nice option because it can be relied on quite heavily in some really precarious situations where you maybe can't get the Landorus on the field, and it can also be used in situations where you're predicting maybe a switch in, so getting that residual damage each turn onto the Dusclops is going to be very useful. But have you got a way to stop the Trick Room now, because the Light Screen and the Reflector up from the Grimmsnarl, it feels like it's done its job, and it's time for the Dusclops to kind of set that Trick Room up, which we know David really struggles against.
Exactly. If Nick can get that Trick Room environment up, he's going to be in a really dominant position here. Regidrago, however, going to jump into the field here for David. It wants to maybe try and get some damage off before that Glastria takes to the fray. Passing shot going to connect, though, into that Grimmsnarl, going to be lowering its attack even further here, and a special attack, of course, as well. But I think the critical thing here for David is he needs to reposition the board, knowing that that Trick Room is inevitably going to be going up here. We're actually going to see the two Pokemon on the field that he led in Game 1, the Regieleki and the Regidrago, as Grimmsnarl goes for that Spirit Break, connecting on to the Regieleki, going to have its special attack reduced now by 1 stage. Definitely not optimal, as Trick Room does indeed get set up here by Nick's Dusclops.
Yeah, now this isn't a terrible position for David right now, because Nick has got his Trick Room up, yes, but he hasn't got any of his big Trick Room, Pokemon on the field, so he's not really going to be able to take advantage of this straight away. Now, Nick is going to have to spend a turn switching out. Does he switch out the Grimmsnarl and potentially bring something into a Dragon Force from the Regidrago, which would be very detrimental at this point? Or do you maybe just allow it? The problem is for him is trying to get the Glastria back onto the field, which is the Pokemon that you want to get in this Trick Room environment, and it's not something you can switch in front of either Reggie, even in this Trick Room environment that we're sitting in right now.
Well, Regidrago just going for the Protect here. Dusclops going to go for a Nightshade, targeting down into that Regieleki once again. Just going to keep taking 50 HP away from its full HP bar. Going to be another Spirit Break going into that Regieleki, however, reducing the special attack even further. And Regieleki is kind of being rendered useless here, so I think it's quite wise of David to go for that Volt Switch, get it to come off the field, reset those stats, so when it comes back and it's going to be in a more opportune position. David does not have access to all 4 of his Pokemon here. He has the utility to play defensively through these Trick Room turns, going for Protects, going for Fake Outs, going for those key switches as well. And as those Trick Room turns keep dwindling away, Nick is running out of less options to go for that critical Dynamax that you want to go with for your Glastria when you look at the Pokemon on David's side of the field.
Yeah, and now that reposition there from David, it's allowed him to get the Incineroar onto the field with that Fake Out support, and he can go for that now into the Grimmsnarl and then throw off one of those big dragon type attacks from the Regidrago, so that could be an option here. But what a surprise, what a move to come out. Not something that we normally see. A bind, Lou, from the Dusclops here.
Yeah, Bind, really interesting. Going to trap the Pokemon here onto the field and do that little bit of residual damage as well with each turn. So really unique choice there from the Dusclops. I believe we actually managed to see a Bind in the region finals as well, but definitely one that hasn't sort of spread itself throughout all of the Dusclopses as of yet. Regidrago going to go for that Dragon Pulse, however, just going to target straight down into the Dusclops, do a small chunk of damage, and of course followed up by that residual burn damage as well as on the Grimmsnarl. So, David really trying to put himself into a position where he's getting that residual damage going through Nick's team, but with the bind as well, Nick is also doing the same thing.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult to reposition now. I mean, you've got the Incineroar that you can use the parting shot on, and I think if you are David, you probably want to try and get the Incineroar off the field soon, so when that Glastria does come back onto the field, you've got the ability to intimidate it from the back. Now, you do have Landorus as well to come in, so you can potentially immediately get a double Intimidate onto Glastria if we do see it on the field, and he's doing all the right things to stall out these Trick Room turns from Nick's side of the field, because he's not taking any knockouts, he's not allowing a free switch in, and I don't think Nick wants to bring anything in unless it is a free switch in. If you want to get that Glastria in its best shape as possible onto the field.
I think the other interesting thing, though, is this Dusclops isn't being KO'd either, and with access to something like the Pain Split, it can keep redoing its HP and setting up a Trick Room maybe a little bit later on in the game, and that's something I think David's going to be wary of, going for another Dragon Pulse here, but you can see Dusclops just able to regain its HP as it goes, while David doesn't have those same means of recovery, as Pokemon will constantly be being chipped away by the moves coming out from Dusclops and the Grimmsnarl. So Nick, maybe isn't too worried about stalling out this first set of Trick Room turns if he is able to get Trick Room up again later on in the match for that Glastria hanging out in the back.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think if you're David, for the Trick Room turns ending, you want to set yourself up with maybe the Regieleki on the field and use that Electric Ball to really do the remaining amount of damage to the Dusclops and potentially time it in a way where the screen support is going down, but it's very difficult to do that when the Grimmsnarl on Nick's side of the field is still sitting in a pretty healthy position and not looking like it's going down anytime soon. But the Trick Room turns will be coming to an end. It's going to be time, I think, to get the Regieleki on the field, and that's going to be the one outlet I feel that David does have that can do some big damage to the Dusclops.
Well, Dusclops going to go for that Pain Split once again into the Incineroar. Just going to regain itself a little bit of HP and deal some out to Incineroar in return as Grimmsnarl fires off that Spirit Break. Targeting down into the Incineroar again, just a little bit of chip constantly dwindling away at these Pokemon on David's side of the field. You know, getting that critical hit as well, every little bit of HP is going to be adding up. So quite wise of Incineroar, I think, to get in on out of there, going down for a parting shot into that Grimmsnarl once again. And I think this Grimmsnarl has been hit many times with things like parting shot, obviously having the burn on there as well, the Intimidates coming in. Its stats are going to be looking a little bit messy, but I think the critical thing that Grimmsnarl is doing is staying on the field. That means the Regidrago is not going to be in an optimal position, and it's going here for that Draco Meteor, going to target down into the Dusclops here. Really doesn't deal a huge amount of damage though, unfortunately, and it's going to have its special attack reduced as well, and due to the bind, it's not able to jump in off the field and get that reset at this stage. But Regieleki's come onto the field, and you mentioned, Lee, that you need Regieleki on his Trick Room ends to go for those powerful Electro Balls.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that David's got access to now that could maybe be the saving grace to get rid of the Dusclops. But the problem is here, you know, Nick just needs to be patient. He could switch in his Landorus at this point and just soak up that Electro Ball damage and then really pin in the Regieleki here for the next turn. Already having the Regidrago pinned on the field with that bind, it's not able to switch out at the minute. So it's a very slow-paced game, but very tactical at the same time. Both players need to be very measured with what they're doing next, because I feel like these are the kind of pivotal turns in the game where if you get a bit too sloppy on one of the turns, it could really cost you the rest of the game. And it's both players just trying to kind of eke each other out at the minute to see which one's going to break first.
Well, no Trick Room going to be reset up for Nick. He's going to bring the Landorus here on the field. And just like you mentioned, Lee, potentially going to be coming in and soaking up that Electro Ball coming up from the Regieleki. Obviously not going to be dealing any damage to a ground type. Regieleki is going for that Electro Ball. And it was indeed going into that Landorus, not the Grimmsnarl. Regidrago going for the Draco Meteor, but avoiding the Landorus that's connected, leading Grimmsnarl free to go for that Spirit Break. Still not being able to pick up a KO against that Regidrago. And in all honesty, I think if you're David Koutesh at this point, you almost want your Regidrago to go down. It's just sitting there on the field like dead weight, and you want to be able to kind of get it off the field and bring another Pokemon in from the back to actually apply some really good damage and pressure to the match.
Yeah, that's the thing. You want to just let it go down, like you say, get something fresh onto the field, because now it's so weak, it's not really doing very much. But the bind has ended, so it is going to be able to just switch out, and that's David saving that for later, maybe become more useful. But the Intimidate, again, going to be useful onto the opposing Landorus on Nick's side of the field.
You can see Grimmsnarl's attack won't go any lower at this stage, but it is able to set up another screen, going for that light screen, as Regieleki goes for the Electro Ball, targeting down into the Grimmsnarl. It is enough to pick up the KO despite the light screen, and Nick has had his Fairy type removed from the field. Able to go for that U-turn on the Landorus though. It is enough to pick up a KO against the Regieleki as well in retaliation, and it allows Nick once again that maneuverability on the field. He can bring in a Pokemon from the back, potentially set up that Trick Room once again, and then have the Landorus able to switch back into that spare slot, go for that Intimidate, or even try and get the Dream Trick Room situation set up here with Glastrier and Dusclops.
Yeah, because once you feel, if you're Nick, once you get the Trick Room maybe set up with your Dusclops, you can potentially then from that point just bring in Glastrier and just really clean up. There's not very much that David has got to be able to deal with that. You know that the Incineroar is going to take big damage from the Max Quakes. The Landorus doesn't want to take anything or entertain any sort of ice type attacks with that 4 times weakness that it's got. And the Regidrago is also very weak at this point. So I think if you are David, you've got to do everything in your power right now to prevent this Trick Room going up, as the light screen does end as well on Nick's side of the field. So that is worth noting.
Yeah, exactly. That's something that could be critical to kind of keep in mind at this point in time, particularly with the Pokemon that David has got on his side. And you can see these players really thinking through every opportunity. Like you said, Lee, this is quite a slow-paced game, but things are incredibly pivotal and it's very, very focused. You need to make sure that you aren't slipping up at any point in terms of which Pokemon you want to bring in so that you can counter the opposing one. And here we see 2 Intimidate setters come hit onto the field and throw an Intimidate around a piece. The one Pokemon who isn't going to mind this in the slightest is that Dusclops. I think this is quite critical here from Nick to be able to use Intimidate against both of David's Pokemon so that Dusclops is a little bit more protected as well, able to go and get that Trick Room up, even though it's had about a third of its HP taken away from it already.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see which Pokemon David maxes. You would imagine the more healthy Pokemon on the field is the Landorus. Probably the more powerful one as well, with Incineroar being a bit more support orientated. So that's probably the option there for David, and he needs to just go hard into the Dusclops and hope that he's got enough between the Landorus and Incineroar to take down that Dusclops. If he can prevent the Trick Room now, I think it puts you in good stead to kind of hopefully try and close this match out and pick up the win. But if Nick's able to get the Trick Room, it's going to be very difficult for David to come back in this match, especially if he can get that Glastrier onto the field and Dynamax it.
I mean, this is something we've seen a lot on this broadcast in particular, is getting deep into a game. So many turns keep going by, but there is still the Dynamax to be utilised by these trainers. And in particular in this game 3, where there have been so many turns, we're now at a point where both the trainers are in a position where they cannot hold off any longer. They have to go for that Dynamax and start picking up KOs. You can do all the ball positioning and defensive plays you want, but ultimately to win a game of Pokemon, you have to pick up KOs and eliminate the opposing team. We've got a Landorus apiece here. Both of them have opted to Dynamax in this particular situation. And the Landorus on David's side going to go for that max airstream, targeting down the Dusclops. It is able to survive on 35 HP. So unless the Incineroar is able to avoid the KO here, Dusclops will be able to set up that Trick Room. But more often than not, the Incineroar with that Flare Blitz. You know, it has taken an Intimidate, but with only... Oh, it is able to survive on 7! Oh, my goodness.
That is so close, isn't it? You know, like, oh, you couldn't get any closer there. Really taking advantage of that max airstream to get the jump on the opposing Landorus with your own Incineroar to make sure that you can get the attack off as well before you are knocked out from the Landorus on Nick's side of the field. But, I mean, the residual damage here is going to play perfectly for Nick, because the Sandstorm is going to actually knock out the Dusclops here, which then just allows the Glastrier to come onto the field, which is perfect timing, especially because David's just set up his airstream and the Lander is now going to be faster than in a Trick Room environment, and so is the Glastrier that's going to come onto the field for Nick. I can't believe how close that was, Lou.
Oh, I can't believe I underestimated Dusclops. I mean, you know, I call myself a Dusclops player, but able to survive. I know it took the Intimidate onto that Incineroar, but I just didn't. I still thought at 35 HP that would be able to pick up the KO, and it's just tantamount to how good Dusclops is as a Pokemon. The fact that it's been KO'd as well, like you said, I think gives Nick the perfect opportunity now here. The Glastriers come on the field, and we see the forfeit being locked in here. I mean,